Welcome, deep divers. Today, we're jumping into something really fascinating, truly revealing, actually. We're looking at sources that uncover a history of India's education system that, well, it might just surprise you.
It often does.
Yeah, because many assume that before British rule, India didn't really have, a sophisticated or widespread system of learning.
That's a common narrative, isn't it?
Exactly, but our sources, they paint a totally different picture. We're talking a vibrant network, thousands of schools, even out in rural Bengal and Bihar.
And widespread literacy, too. It's all there in William Adams' report from the 1830s. Quite detailed.
Right. So our mission for this deep dive is to pull out the key nuggets of knowledge from this material. We want to explore how this thriving indigenous system was systematically taken apart
Dismantled, yeah. And replaced.
and replaced, leaving a really profound and lasting impact. It's about understanding not just what happened, but trying to get at the why.
And the echoes today. You can still feel them.
Absolutely. How that shift from a decentralized, knowledge-rich system to one really just serving colonial interests, how that still resonates. Okay, so let's unpack that. If we push aside the common myths, what did education in India actually look like before the British really established control? The sources suggest something quite different from what many of us learned.
Indeed. And the first key thing to grasp is just how fundamentally different it was. It wasn't fragmented or basic. It was, this huge decentralized network.
Decentralized, okay.
Yeah, and incredibly knowledge-rich, woven right into the fabric of communities.
Oh.
Almost like a living system, part of society itself.
And what did that look like practically? You mentioned institutions.
Right, you had things like gurukuls, pasturelas, madrasas, each rooted in slightly different traditions, different communities.
And then the big famous ones.
Oh, absolutely. The ancient universities, Nalanda, Takshashila, Vikramashila, these were, world-renowned centers for advanced learning.
Wow. But what really jumps out from the sources, for me at least, is the accessibility. How available was this education?
That's a crucial point. It was often free or very, very low cost.
How was that funded then?
Mostly by the local communities themselves. Also by, local kings, wealthy merchants, temple trusts. This really widespread support meant it wasn't just for the elite.
So it reached lots of different people.
Many castes, many communities, especially, and this is important, in the villages, not just an urban phenomenon.
Okay, so beyond the structure, what about what was actually taught? You said it was knowledge rich?
Yes, and what's really remarkable is the sheer breadth of the curriculum.
Mm.
And its practical focus. This wasn't just about memorizing texts.
Right.
Students learned things we still value hugely. Mathematics, Ganita, astronomy, Jyotisha, medicine like Ayurveda was a core subject, plus philosophy, darshana, logic, nyaya, grammar, Vyaskarana.
Really rigorous intellectual training.
So a mix of intellectual and practical.
Totally.
Right.
It went beyond pure academics, too. Arts, music, various crafts, vocational skills. Education was very much life-oriented, preparing people for their role in society.
And crucially, taught in local languages. Primarily, yes. Regional languages and Sanskrit.
Yeah.
So it connected directly to students' lives, their culture.
And it's not just Indian sources saying this, right? The British themselves documented it.
Exactly. William Adams' report, the one from 1835 you mentioned earlier, he found, astonishingly, a lack that's 100,000 schools just in Bengal and Bihar.
100,000. That's staggering.
It is. And later, Dr. G.W. Leitner in 1882 wrote about Punjab having this vibrant traditional education scene before the British started actively dismantling it.
And Tarampal's research backs this up, too.
Yes, Tarampal did extensive work, using British archives, mind you. His findings confirm widespread literacy and schooling across India before the colonial intervention really took hold. The evidence is, well, pretty strong.
Okay, that paints a really vivid picture. A system deeply embedded, vibrant, decentralized. So how did it start to fall apart? The sources seem to say it wasn't like an overnight destruction.
No, not like knocking down buildings. It was more insidious, more subtle. A really crucial takeaway from the sources is how British economic policies started to undermine the local communities. And that, in turn, cut off the funding, the lifeblood of this education system.
Okay, economic policies. Like the Zamindari system, how did that fit in?
The Zamindari system. That was about permanent land revenue settlements. Basically, the British fixed high revenue demands. This system started stripping wealth away from the villagers, from the temple trusts.
The very people funding the schools.
Exactly. The traditional patrons, the merchants, the local landlords, the regional rulers, their own economic power was reduced or, redirected towards British revenue collection. They simply couldn't afford to support the local schools like they used to.
So it wasn't a direct attack on the schools initially, but more like starving them financially?
Precisely. Cutting off the oxygen, as you put it. And this had a ripple effect, a devastating one.
Which,
These community-funded schools, the backbone of the whole system, they just gradually lost their support. Without the money, and importantly, without recognition from the new colonial government, they started closing, one by one.
a slow
A
collapse.
slow, quiet collapse of this huge decentralized network, almost happening beneath the surface, driven by economic changes.
Right. Which brings us to, well, a really pivotal moment, maybe the most controversial part of this whole story. Thomas Babington Macaulay.
Ah, Macaulay. And his famous Minute of 1835.
Yes. His stated goal, I mean, it's quite chilling when you read it.
It is. He explicitly wanted to, and this is his phrase, form a class who may be interpreters between us and the millions whom we govern.
Interpreters. Not equals.
No, and his disdain for Indian knowledge was just blunt. He famously said a single shelf of a good European library was worth the whole native literature of India and Arabia.
Wow, just completely dismissive. So his vision wasn't about building on what was there, it was about creating this new class.
Indian in blood and color, but English in taste, in opinions, in morals, and in intellect. That was the goal.
A total ideological shift, reshaping the Indian mind, essentially.
Which, it really makes you ask, what was the real purpose of the education system they wanted to build?
It doesn't sound like broad empowerment.
Not at all. When you dig into Macaulay's intent, it's pretty clear it wasn't about spreading knowledge widely or fostering critical thinking across society. It was fundamentally about creating a subservient administrative class.
Clerks, basically.
Clerks for the colonial machine. They needed people to help run the administration, follow orders. They weren't looking for independent thinkers or scientists or philosophers in the Indian context.
And the practical effect of this new ideology, what happened on the ground?
Well, the impact was pretty immediate and profound. The British authorities just stopped funding the traditional Indian schools, pulled the plug completely.
And shifted resources.
Shifted resources to actively promote English education. But, and this is key, primarily for a very small elite group.
So education became a tool.
Absolutely. Transformed from this community thing into a deliberate tool for colonial control, serving the empire's interests first and foremost.
Okay, so this new ideological framework is set. What did the actual British education system look like once it was imposed? How did it operate?
Well, it was completely different from the diverse local system before. It was very centralized.
Top down.
Top-down, exam-focused, heavily reliant on rote learning. Conformity was valued way above creativity or critical thought. It was designed for very specific, narrow output.
And the curriculum itself, you said it narrowed.
Oh, significantly. The emphasis shifted dramatically. It wasn't about holistic learning anymore. It was about passing these government-set exams.
What subjects were prioritized?
Mostly English, literature, British history, presented from their perspective, of course, and some very basic science and law. Things needed for administration.
Okay.
And then, in 1857, they cemented this by setting up the first few universities in Bombay, Calcutta, and Madras, modeled on London University.
What's really striking, though, is how the sources describe the systematic marginalization of Indian knowledge. How did they actually push it aside?
Yeah, it was quite deliberate. Fields where India had, centuries of excellence, traditional medicine like Ayurveda, advanced astronomy, sophisticated mathematics, these weren't just ignored.
They were excluded.
Often completely excluded from the new curriculum, or actively devalued. Indigenous intellectuals, scholars who were once deeply respected, were increasingly labeled superstitious or unscientific.
By the colonial powers.
By the colonial powers, yes, but also, sadly, by some of the newly English-educated Indian elite who absorbed that perspective.
So it wasn't just about what was taught, but the message sent by what was left out and actively discredited.
Exactly, and it went further. Local crafts, indigenous technologies, which were often part of traditional learning.
Practical skills.
Yeah, those were suppressed too, sometimes actively destroyed, to make way for British manufactured goods, to promote British industry.
So the economic angle comes back in.
It's all interconnected. This led to this profound loss of respect, even among Indians themselves, for their own intellectual traditions.
Yeah.
The system just wasn't designed to educate broadly or foster genuine research in an Indian context.
Its main job was producing clerks.
Low-level clerks, yes. Effectively cutting students off from their own history, their own civilization's achievements.
Okay, let's talk impact. Measurable consequences.
Wow.
What did all this mean for the average Indian? What was the tangible effect?
Well, the numbers on literacy are pretty stark and, frankly, quite damning.
How did they show?
Estimates suggest literacy in some areas around 1800 might have been around 30%, maybe even higher in places.
Which is pretty high for that era, globally.
It is. But during British rule, it plummeted. By 1947, when India finally gained independence, the overall literacy rate was only about 12%.
12%, that's a massive
A
decline.
huge, undeniable decline.
And it sounds like the education that was available became much more exclusive.
Oh, absolutely. It became very urban-centric, very elitist. It largely shut out huge sections of the population.
Who got excluded?
Most rural communities, the vast majority. Women were largely excluded. Lower castes faced significant barriers. Access to either modern knowledge or their traditional heritage was severely restricted for most people. It created this deep educational divide.
So, connecting this to the bigger picture, it wasn't just about falling literacy rates, was it? There was something deeper going on.
Much deeper. Many scholars talk about it as mental colonization, a kind of cultural alienation.
How did that manifest?
The newly educated elite, the ones taught in English, steeped in British thought, they often became disconnected from their own traditions, sometimes even looking down on their own culture, their own languages, their heritage.
A disconnect.
A huge disconnect, and also a disconnect between education and livelihood. Unlike the earlier systems, which often included vocational skills relevant to the community.
This new system didn't prepare you for local life in the same way.
Not really. It prepared you for a government job if you were lucky enough to get one. It wasn't geared towards strengthening local economies or skills.
So, the legacy at independence. What did India inherit?
Well, fundamentally, India inherited a deeply damaged system, over-centralized, relentlessly exam-focused, and profoundly disconnected from its own languages, its own culture, its own needs.
And that took time to fix.
Decades. And the process is arguably still ongoing. It took so long to start recovering, rebuilding, trying to decolonize education. And honestly, many of those colonial legacies, the focus on exams, the curriculum biases, the structure, they still linger today. It's a shadow that hasn't fully lifted.
It's really important to remember, though, that this wasn't just passively accepted. People pushed back, didn't they? There were strong voices against the system.
Oh, absolutely. There was significant resistance. Figures like Mahatma Gandhi, for instance. He was scathing about colonial education, called it a sinful imitation.
And he proposed an alternative.
Yes, his concept of Nai Talim, new education. It was all about basic education rooted in Indian culture, connected to practical vocational skills, self-sufficiency.
Wow.
Swami Vivekananda, he was another powerful critic. He believed the British system literally taught Indians to hate their own culture, to feel ashamed of it.
Wow.
And Rabindranath Tagore, the great poet and thinker, he strongly opposed the rote learning, the mechanical nature of it all. He founded Shantiniketan specifically to promote a more holistic, creative, nature-connected form of learning.
Their critiques really highlight the core differences, don't they? If we just quickly recap, pre-British used regional languages, Sanskrit, British imposed English.
Right. Funding was local, community-based. It became centralized, controlled from above.
The curriculum went from broad, life skills oriented to narrow, focused on colonial admin needs.
The purpose shifted from knowledge and life skills to just serving the administration.
And the reach changed dramatically. Rural, inclusive, became elitist, urban.
And the most damning statistic, literacy, which seemed to be growing or at least widespread, sharply declined under British rule.
Yeah. What a journey, really digging into this. Understanding how deeply colonialism shaped something as basic, as fundamental as education in India. It really does shift your perspective.
It does. And maybe this raises an important question for you, our listener, to ponder. How does understanding this history, this erosion of diverse knowledge systems, how does that shape how we view education today?
Mm-hmm.
And maybe what value should we place on local traditions, on different ways of knowing and learning within our own communities, wherever we are?
That's a powerful thought to end on. We hope you've pulled some valuable nuggets from this deep dive today. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep digging deeper.